The Senate moves towards a progressive income tax, and the state is in the hemp business. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. The legislature was back in town this last week, and May is their get everything finished month if they can. Here to talk about it with me, we have Kent Redfield has returned. Thank you. Professor Emeritus of Political Science, University of Illinois Springfield. Welcome back, Kent.
Good to be here.
And Dave Dahl is back. He is State House reporter for WTAX Radio in Springfield.
Thank you.
Welcome. So the Senate took action and passed a constitutional amendment proposal that is half of the way, because the House has to do the same thing, to put on the ballot in November of 2020 that Illinois can have a progressive income tax. I guess the debate didn't take too long.
The Sun-Times pointed out that Stairway to Heaven was longer than the debate in the Senate. And I think one thing the whole thing is emblematic of is, once again, which we said in the minimum wage debate, Governor Pritzker's ability to get stuff done quickly when he wants to. They were talking about the rates just the day before the vote. They talked about the rates on Tuesday afternoon in committee, and then early afternoon Wednesday, slammed it through with no Republican support.
Right. Do things look as easy in the House, Kent?
No.
Or Dave?
I'm sorry.
No, please go.
No, everybody says they're having trouble counting to 71. It'll need 71 on it, and so it'll be interesting to see if they take the Senate proposal as is and try to, build up a roll call or what.
Right, and of course there are 74 Democrats in the House, but some were elected in somewhat of a Democratic wave this last year in midterm Trump year, for example, and some of those people are from Republican areas.
And another thing, when it seems to me, when they were talking about raising taxes, the speaker said, we're going to need Republican participation. This is going to be a bipartisan vote, and the Republicans are going to need to put some votes on the bill.
Right, but there's been no indication so far. I mean, every Republican in the House had signed on to that resolution earlier in the session saying we oppose a progressive income tax,
and
because we are taking that line that, well, they can say the rates will only affect top earners now, but in the future they can use simple majority votes to change those rates, and the middle class will be affected, whereas J.B. Pritzker says the middle class won't be affected. So
it was just Thursday morning that I learned who the sponsors in the House were going to be of the rates bill and then the constitutional amendment, Zaleski and Martwick, respectively.
And, it may in fact be that once we put all of this together, which is Capitol bill, marijuana, sports betting, and the various things, the constitutional amendment and the actual implementation bill, there may be some Republican votes there, but you're going to have to, I think, cut some pretty significant deals in terms of to entice Republicans to come off what's their unified opposition. At some point, they're going to have to decide whether they're the Republicans, whether they're just going to be no on everything. There are some things they would like to accomplish, like the Capitol bill.
Right.
And
everybody wants to build roads,
maybe
bridges.
Leverage there, but right now it's hard to see where those Republican votes in the House might come from. And there certainly is a tradition of putting some Republican votes or Democratic votes on tax bills, but that's not been universal in terms of the history. We've passed some things on partisan majorities in the past.
Yeah, we'll see where it goes. There's already advertising has been going on non-public TV. Think Big Illinois, which is an outside group funded in part by J.B. Pritzker, kind of named after his campaign theme that he, thinks big and does big things, etc. But they are saying, Illinois has an unfair tax system. He keeps calling it, and that group calls a progressive income tax a fair tax. Under the rates that the Senate slightly revised and then passed as in a separate measure from the constitutional amendment itself, everybody making up to $250,000 would pay a little bit less or the same as the 4.95% rate on taxes now. The highest rate would be 7.99%. I think that's up a little bit from what J.B. Pritzker
For
had said.
1/100%.
Yeah, it was 7.95 at 7.99. And there is a bit of a differentiation between single filers and married and joint filers. It goes, that top rate would apply to single filers making $750,000 or over that, and married joint filers over $1 million. So that's just showing that there's like less of a marriage penalty. But it's still a significantly higher tax on the very higher incomes. And Pritzker has been able to say, Democrats have said, 97% of the people don't make $250,000 a year, so won't pay that extra rate. But again, Republicans, outside groups like the Illinois Policy Institute, there are some others that say Ideas Illinois, which Greg Bays runs, used to run the Illinois Manufacturers Association. Basically, the business side says, let's not go to a progressive tax because it could affect more than just those top filers. And even those top filers, some of those are people in business who may have an individual income tax kind of situation with their business. So they're not really that rich, but they're going to be paying a lot more in taxes. They may leave the state. There are all these arguments. Where do we?
And the details, if you got a marriage penalty or don't have a marriage penalty, if people understand what the marriage penalty is, that's a tweak, but it's still, it's the big picture. If it's 3% are going to pay more, and that's the way you want to sell it, and as long as you can talk in those kinds of terms, and then there are a lot more people that make less than the cutoff point than make more than the cutoff point. The biggest argument for the anti-people is this generalized, you can't trust government,
right.
and therefore, what are they going to do? Well, if they don't get the graduated income tax, it's quite likely that we'll have across-the-board tax increase and big budget cuts. So people are going to, if you're below the cutoff point, it's in your own best interest or self-interest probably to vote for the graduated income tax if you're looking at it rationally. But the opposition is trying to get you to look at it from the lens of this is government asking you to trust them, and there's whatever the situation now is, the government can make it worse. So we ought to stick with this.
Right, and to the Republicans, it's the Democrats who are in charge, because they still are putting Mike Madigan's picture and some things next to J.B. Pritzker's picture.
Well, the Republicans, if they think the graduated tax is so bad, look, if this passes out of the House with a 3/5 vote, it goes onto the ballot.
In November 2020.
And all the Republicans have to do is convince 41% of Illinois to vote no on it. Do the Republicans not trust 41% of Illinois voters to vote with them their way?
This just portends, I think, a year and a half of a lot of advertising, I think, because clearly J.B.
I hope
Pritzker,
so. I mean, wouldn't that be great?
You sound like a guy that works for a commercial radio station.
As long as they're not robocalls.
That's right. Okay, understood. So the Senate also passed some riders to this tax bill. One is a potential property tax freeze, which Andy Menard, state senator from Macoupin County, who was big in helping rewrite the school aid formula and evening out what schools get to try to make it more equitable statewide. And he said if there's a bill put forward in the Senate that if targets are met in school funding, then property tax at the local level couldn't be raised in a year that happens.
I think that meeting those targets is unlikely. For one thing, it's kind of hazy in the bill just what the targets are, and it's like saying, well, it's going to be a balanced budget, or I'm going to buy a car made in the U.S. I mean, how do you determine that? Who's to say?
Well, we'll see.
And they need much more money to get to that point where they are funding everybody.
There was another rider bill that said at some point the estate tax would be removed, which is something Republicans have wanted for a long time. And John Cullerton, the president of the Senate, actually put this forward. Kent, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that is something that is intended to entice people who have big estates or people who care about people that have big estates. It would seem like you might want to hold that back and have it a negotiating chip rather than give it away. I mean, normally it's not good strategy to negotiate with yourself and start putting out your proposal and then subtracting from it. But if we paint it as, there's a property tax freeze coming if this all works, we're going to lower some taxes as general, rhetorical positions. That's the narrative you want to put out there, that you're helping everybody out and this is going to make things better. And again, the pushback is not about the details, but these are more promises from government.
All right. Well, we'll have to see what happens. There's still a general feeling, and you certainly heard from the opposition, government spends too much, they should cut. I know when Governor Rauner ran in 2014, I remember he was saying how terrible it is how many state employees we have, and I remember somebody asked him at a press conference, I happened to be in Chicago, state government had lost about 20,000 people since George Ryan's time, from like 70,000 to 50,000 people. I mean, a lot of cuts have been made in state government, but there's people still think there's a lot of bloat, and certainly we all know, they seem to fill positions rather quickly some days. But, so you're never going to get away from these arguments. So on the other hand, the Pritzker people, I think, as you said, Kent, and their budget people say, if you don't have the money that they are seeking to fill more than a $3 billion deficit in kind of structural deficit in the budget from a higher income tax or something, and these other things they want, like gambling, the cuts will be pretty severe in cutting into some programs that are important, like, say, Department of Children and Family Services, which needs, new investigators, because we keep seeing situations where, there are clearly overloaded investigators, and some kids, unfortunately, have been killed, families that maybe the department should have done more.
And some fudging their reports.
Yeah, well, that's another issue, but very difficult situation. We'll see what goes on with that. I mentioned at the opening of the show that we are now in the hemp business. The governor had a news conference in his office this last week. John Sullivan, former Democratic state senator from Rushville, in the farming business, is now director of ag, and they were very proud to announce that under new legislation, the government had promulgated rules, and people could apply to plant hemp seed, I guess for fiber and oil that can come from this product, which is somehow related to marijuana, but not marijuana itself, and the state wants to keep a close eye on it. And I guess they had, in the first 2 days, 369 applications filed, so I guess we're going to be in a new business in Illinois.
Well, and again, given both how large a part of the Illinois economy agriculture is, and then the stress that agriculture is under for national and international forces, and the really depressed state of rural communities, particularly downstate rural communities, that any good news, any positive, any activity relating to the agricultural economy and to helping out farmers is, that's something you want out there. You want that to be part of the way people perceive, what's the governor done? Well, he's helping us to, open new markets, get a new crop out there. And so it seems like, a lot of effort for something that, may generate, some, it's not going to replace corn or soybeans at any point, but it's a positive thing to do, but it's also, again, in terms of that narrative that you're trying to put out there, then this is a good thing for the governor to be there with the, longtime downstate, legislator talking about what we're doing for the farmers.
And we'll see if it becomes a big cash crop or not. But it's of course, as we tape this, there's been a lot of rain, so I don't even think you can plant hemp seed unless things dry out a bit, but we're working on that.
Yeah, well, John Sullivan can't do anything about that.
No, he can hope, and I know people can go to the Ag Department website to get the application forms, I think, to grow hemp if you wish. One of the other big issues that is waiting for the legislature to act on is a capital plan. We still don't know the parameters of how they want to raise the money for this. There's been talk of a gasoline tax. The governor has taken off the table like a mileage tax on vehicles, because that came up during the campaign, and he was roundly criticized for it, and he has recently again said he's not going to do that. But I saw a couple of news conferences were held at the Capitol this last week. One was about vertical infrastructure, which was people from hospitals and universities and schools all saying we need buildings. A capital plan could help pay for buildings, in addition to roads and bridges, which a potential increase in the gasoline tax, which may come, given that even the State Chamber of Commerce has a plan put forward that has, like, I think it's a 25-cent per gallon gasoline tax increase, with other, enhancements to perhaps
get rid
ease
of
the
the
pain.
sales tax on gas.
Yeah, there you go. So that would be a change. We'll see where it goes, but does it still look likely we will have a construction program with new taxes or fees this spring?
It is really going to be the size of the program. Now, again, we could end up with total chaos and inter-party and cross-party warfare, but it seems reasonable to assume that they're going to get some agreement on spending some money on buildings, the vertical part, and on roads, bridges, and other mass transportation, the horizontal part. That's a huge part of Illinois' advantage, is transportation, and we certainly have neglected it. Paying for it is very difficult. If you take the sales tax off of gasoline, and not everybody knows that when you pay at the pump,
We're
part
even
of that
paying sales tax on the gasoline tax, actually.
yeah,
Tax on a tax,
and
which
it goes,
drives anti-tax people crazy.
Yeah, and it goes,
which is understandable.
Goes in the general revenue fund, doesn't go to the road fund. And so if you take that off, then you punch a hole in a budget that is somewhere between fragile and completely out of balance in terms of what's being proposed. So we are behind national averages in surrounding states in what it costs to register a car, to transfer a title. Jesse White has worked very hard to keep any of those fees, the Secretary of State, from being raised. But we certainly could, get a significant chunk of money by making big increases in what it costs you to register.
Auto registration
and
fees. Yeah.
there are places
Which is,
to
when
get the
George
money.
Ryan had a capital plan, that's what happened. After he got elected, he proposed doubling it. Everybody went crazy. He ended up increasing it by 50%, and that raised the money for a big capital plan that built a lot of roads.
But the roll call together on the money, you've got to make everybody happy on the projects, and so this is a very complicated thing to put together
In 4 weeks.
in 4 weeks.
Yeah. And Dave, I think we were mentioning, you might have been at the same news conference, but when the university and college people were there was the Elgin Community College president, I think it's David Sam. Made a very interesting point. He said, manufacturing is on the increase. Companies are donating equipment to our community colleges to train people. We have no buildings to put them in. And of course, the community college system is a part of state government. I think it only started like in the 60s or so, but there are like 50 campuses across the state. It's a big deal. And when you look at like the Illinois Manufacturers Association, they don't, which the governor spoke at a business lunch this week with the Manufacturers Association and Retail Merchants, big business lunch. They don't want the progressive income tax, but they really want job training. And the community college system in Illinois has been a great place for lots of people who are young and just out of high school, or retraining if they're changing careers midstream, midlife. That's where you go to learn auto mechanics and drive a truck and do all kinds of different things. So they're making the argument that you need buildings to house these programs to teach people things. So we'll see where that goes. An odd and interesting and negative thing to talk about. Capitol Facts, I think, was the first to break this, as I recall, early in the week, but many legislators this last week got threatening letters. I have kind of one in front of me. There are similar headlines on all of them, and they were mailed to people at different places from odd addresses. Somebody clearly knows a lot about the pension system. It was kind of an anti-pension threat to legislators. Dead people can't collect fat state pensions. And I just basically saying that we have to change the Constitution. The legislators, or it was basically very threatening of mass murder. This is a terrible thing. I hate to give it publicity in that sense, but this is something that's going on. I went to the State House the day after this came out. People were milling about. The building was full of people. It was not in any way changing the way people are operating or the building, but it's in these times when people actually do take guns in their hands and shoot people, it was a dangerous thing. And you have somebody who knows a lot about the state pension system sending very specific letters to addresses of legislators. And I guess, would say that we hope the authorities catch this person soon. And it seems that they're leaving a trail of clues by what they know.
Yeah, and it is, it is certainly a sign of the times that, both because it was a sophisticated letter that, this was not somebody just sitting in a bar somewhere writing on the back of a napkin. That
there was more work put into this than a lot of my columns, I'm telling you.
Yeah, but given that, and given just the general political climate and how polarized we are, and the violence that we have in American society, then it does give you pause. And and it was directed at some unions, some other public officials who are not legislators, and it just is a very unfortunate sign of the times that you have to take these things seriously, and it just makes life a little less comfortable than it really ought to be, and it's too bad.
Yeah, you can't take the threats as not real. You have to kind of take them seriously.
Yeah, those car crashes, are they really accidents?
Yeah, it's
a lot of ominous sounding stuff. And as you folks said, I mean, it's probably more than just some crank. It's a crank who knows what he or she's talking about.
Right. Well, we'll see how easy it is for the authorities to track the mail. I'm sure some very high-level law enforcement people are looking into that, so we'll see where it goes.
Not a computer, the U.S. mail.
Right.
I mean, the thing almost looks like it was composed of letters cut out of a magazine.
Yeah, somebody has quite the imagination, and we hope it's only that. I talked about hemp earlier. Let's talk about the more serious THC, if that's the right drug or thing. But marijuana.
As if you don't know.
I'm mostly a beer guy. But anyway, Dave? How does it look for legalization of marijuana? I saw that Marty Moylan is a state representative from the suburbs who's still continuing, got many of his colleagues to sign a letter saying let's slow up on this. Law enforcement is still not necessarily on board. The governor's still pushing for legal recreational marijuana in Illinois again within the next 4 weeks. How's it looking?
Well, supposedly we were going to see the language for a bill any time now, and with now the first of the last 5 weeks history, we haven't. They say it's coming. I don't know if they're waiting. I don't know what they're waiting for. But with regard to Moylan, he's got now enough people on his resolution that if they actually did vote against the bill, it would go down. Just because they signed the resolution, I don't think that's a promise to vote a certain way.
Right.
And
the resolution was just say go slow with marijuana. Let's not rush into this thing.
One person told me a lot of those guys probably signed it to get Moylan out of their office. I'll sign, go away.
Yeah. Is Illinois ready for a big cultural change like this, Kent?
It is driven by both culture and economics.
Right.
And
they need some money from it.
It is it's one of the pillars or the legs of the stool that this budget plan to get us through 2 years until we get to the promised land of the graduated income tax. So it's a very precarious budget if we don't have the licensing money this year, and then the next fiscal year start to get money from the taxes, then the numbers that are shaky may become untenable in terms of balancing the budget. So there's going to be huge pressure to do this. There's still, certainly there was a discussion in terms of the legislative minority caucus, the Black Caucus, about some criminal justice aspects of it and some aspects having to do with who would be able to have access to licenses.
Let's make sure the business goes to the minority community as well.
And minority businesses is requirements, having enough capital to do. This is, we're talking millions of dollars for these licenses and stuff, and so that can become problematic in terms of raising that much capital. So the details are what's probably holding things up. Is you want to get as many people on board as possible.
Yeah.
You're only looking for 60. There should be able to get it, but there are not any done deals when you've got
Nope.
something as tenuous as this session.
Well, they started being the only one in the Midwest to do it. Now we've let Michigan get ahead of us.
Oh, is that right?
So, well, yeah, it's legal there. We're not going to be the first in the Midwest now.
Gotcha. We've only got a little time left. I'm just going to mention the name Mark Janis. He is the former state worker from Springfield who took a case to the U.S. Supreme Court saying that you couldn't be forced to pay what the unions call fair share dues. If you don't want to join the union and you work for a government, you don't have to now under a Supreme Court decision that has his name on it. He was at a news conference in Chicago with there's other employees filing a lawsuit to try to get fair share or agency fee dues that were paid by people even before that decision came down back. There's like 2,700 state workers that want to get their money back that they had paid for into the union when they didn't want to join. It's a lawsuit in Chicago. Kent, any thoughts on if they can reach back to get that money through a federal lawsuit?
It's almost identical to a lawsuit that they had filed, and then there was a summary judgment to dismiss it in this third week of March. And so we're kind of, we're going to run this again, and with a promise to now appeal it if it's a negative decision. That will mean a appellate in all the way up to the Supreme Court. So there's a policy objective here, which is they'd like to get the money back and to take money from unions. There's also you have to do this if you're a non-for-profit. You do this thing to drum up business.
And it's the Liberty Justice Center and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Fund working on that again, as they did on the Janis case. With that, our time is done. Kent Redfield and Dave Dahl, thanks for the conversation. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.